My husband, the CEO, told me, "You're sleeping in the guest room until you say sorry." I just nodded and said, "Okay." The next morning he came in and asked, "Have you learned your lesson?" But when he saw my side of the closet empty and the divorce papers on the table, he finally understood who was really in charge. "Who told you could make a scene tonight?" Silas hissed across the white linen as the waiters swept past with silver domes. His smile stayed pinned for the table, but his eyes were knives. The crystal near my elbow trembled a little because my hand wasn't as steady as I wanted. On his right, the young woman with the diamond drop earrings pressed 2 fingers to his sleeve like she owned the fabric. She giggled, soft and polished, and said, "Relax, see. She's only teasing." That was the first time I heard the nickname. It didn't sound like business. It sounded like a secret I hadn't agreed to. I didn't start the day expecting to be embarrassed at a table that cost more than my first car. At 5:45 a.m., the penthouse was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft click of the elevator down the hall. I measured out Silas's coffee, 1 heaping scoop of the dark roast, a pinch of cinnamon because his mother swears it helps the heart, 2 drops of vanilla, and set the machine to brew. While it gurgled, I ironed his shirts. The dry cleaner never presses the collars right and Silas notices. I stood at the board watching the first pale stripe of sunrise slide over Central Park, and pressed the steam button like I was smoothing out the day before it had a chance to wrinkle. Before we go on, thank you for being here and sharing in this journey of strength and self-worth. If you believe every woman deserves her voice back, hit subscribe. It's free and truly helps. Now let's see what happens next. The kitchen window gave me back a woman with careful hair and a Paris robe that used to make me feel glamorous. The silk is still lovely. I'm the one who's faded. I laid out Silas's vitamins in the silver dish his mother gifted us, the one shaped like a leaf, and I found myself counting them twice. Omega-3D magnesium, just to keep my hands moving. There was a time when his first sip of coffee and the little pleased sound he made felt like a shared victory. Lately it feels like a score I'm expected to keep without missing a point. He patted in, checked his phone before he looked at me and said, "Dinner tonight, Morrison Industries. You remember who's who?" I nodded. He kissed the air near my cheek. "Good girl." The words landed like a paper cut, small, easy to ignore, still stinging. At 3 in the afternoon, my hairdresser pinned me into the style Silas calls approachable elegance, which means soft waves that don't move unless the market drops. I had the guest list on my lap and a pen in my hand. I make notes in the margins. Richard Morrison prefers stories about sailing. His wife loves small dogs and hates red meat. The CFO's partner collects teapots. I memorize people the way some women memorize recipes. It's a skill that doesn't show until it saves someone else from choking. My phone lit up with Carol's name. We used to walk the reservoir together at dawn. I let it go to voicemail because I didn't have the energy to explain why I always seem busy right when she's free. The manicurist asked if I wanted the bright color or the safe one. I chose the soft pink that goes with everything and says nothing. In the closet, I ran my fingers over the emerald dress that makes my skin look warm. I could hear Silas in my head. "Green makes you look like you're trying too hard." I zipped myself into the navy he approved last week and practiced my smile in the mirror. Not too wide, not too small. The expression you wear when you're expected to be the room's temperature. The dining room at the hotel smelled like polished wood and truffle oil. The lights were low enough to hide tired faces. The wives clustered in a corner, laughing with a little too much air in their voices, trading updates on schools and summer rentals. I took my spot by Silas, the position I've held for 12 years. And felt the familiar weight of his hand at the small of my back. That's when she arrived. The young woman moved the way people move when they think a spotlight is a birthright. Her dress was sleek and bright, the kind of fabric that whispers when it passes by. She slid into the space between us with casual ownership. "There you are," she said to him as if I were the one who'd kept her waiting. Silas introduced her as Brittany, a consultant. He didn't give a last name. "Game changer," he added like a headline. She laughed and touched his elbow as if it were a habit. The board members noticed. Wives notice everything. Brittany called him C, then CC, which sounded private and silly at the same time. I decided to be gracious. I asked where she grew up, what brought her to New York, how long she'd been in strategy. She answered like a person who enjoys being asked questions more than answering them. Then she tilted her head at me. "Do you still get that beautiful eastern light in the master?" she said. "You're lucky. The guest room is lovely too at sunrise." My napkin slipped. I hadn't mentioned our floor plan. I told myself she was just overeager, the way new people can be when they want to fit fast. I excused the familiarity as youth. I excused the perfume that smelled like grapefruit and something sharper. but she went on, admiring the Monet in the study, which is not a Monet, only a print Silas likes to pretend is important, and describing the view from our terrace as if she'd been there to watch the car lights on Fifth Avenue blur into threads. It takes a simple sentence to tilt a room. C says you're an angel for keeping everything running, she said. He needs that. The wives who don't owe me anything glanced at me and then at their plates. The soup arrived. A server placed a bowl in front of me and I stared at the steam because it was easier than staring at my husband. My stomach felt as if I'd missed a stare in the dark. Brittany leaned across Silas, knuckles grazing his tie. You did it again, she said, and retied the knot like she'd practiced. It was a small gesture. Too small and too easy and too sure of itself. I heard my voice before I had a plan for it. Do you do that often? I asked, eyes on her hands. The table quieted the way people do when they sense a fire before they smell smoke. Silas laughed, that boardroom laugh that can turn a no into a maybe. Juniper, he said, using my name like a warning, not a welcome. I didn't back down. I'm curious, I added, keeping my tone light. Is tie straightening part of the consultant package? Or is that one of the premium services? Someone coughed. A fork clinked too hard against china. The wives focused on buttering invisible bread. The men considered their wine. Brittany's smile stayed, but her eyes cooled. We're all family here, she said. Right, see. Enough, Silas said through his teeth, mouth still smiling for the chairman seated opposite. He reached under the table and pinched the inside of my arm. Not hard, just a reminder. Years ago I might have laughed it off. Tonight the pinch felt like a memo I didn't sign. Conversation resumed in careful pieces, as if everyone had agreed to skip the page with the embarrassing paragraph. I took a sip of water. The glass trembled against my lip. To steady myself, I thought of the morning, how the ironing board squeaked when I folded it, how the coffee warmed my palms, how I placed his cuff links on the dresser like two small coins. I thought of our 5th anniversary in Paris, the way he looked at me when I came down the hotel staircase in that robe, the way I believed looking at me would always feel like that. Memory can be a soft blanket or a rope burn. Tonight it rubbed raw. Richard Morrison called on Silas to toast the quarter. Silas stood tall and handsome and persuasive and thanked everyone for their trust. He praised the team. He praised our partners at the table. His hand drifted toward Brittany for a beat that was longer than polite. She lifted her glass toward him with a grin designed for photographers. I held mine steady. When he sat, he angled his body toward her, not me. That shift is nothing you can cite in court, but some changes are indictments without paperwork. Dessert arrived, a delicate thing with spun sugar that caught the light. Brittany lifted her phone and snapped a photo of the plate, then turned the camera for a quick selfie with Silas in the background. Caption, she murmured, winning. I set down my spoon. Do you have a pet name for my husband? I asked her gently. Or does he only use the one for you in private? My voice wasn't loud. It traveled anyway. I could feel the table tilt around me again, this time like a boat when a wave takes it by surprise. Silas's smile died first, then his jaw took over. Surprise flashed, then heat, then something flat and final I recognized from the days he fired people over breakfast. Juniper, he said low, we will discuss your behavior later. The words didn't belong to our marriage. They belonged to his corner office. Brittany opened her mouth, then closed it, then leaned back as if she were reconsidering her investment. I nodded as if we were talking about a dry agenda item. Of course, I said. Make sure to put it on the calendar. I'd hate to be accused of missing a meeting. One of the wives coughed into her napkin to cover a laugh she didn't mean to let out. The CFO stared at his plate as if reading numbers there. The air turned thin. Even the music from the hotel bar seemed to retreat. Silas didn't speak to me during the car ride home. He typed on his phone. Outside the window, the city flickered through the tinted glass. Inside, I could hear my own breathing. Brittany's perfume, citrus and bite, clung to his jacket. I looked down at my hands, folded like a schoolgirl's, and thought of the emerald dress hanging quiet in our closet, the one I'd chosen for myself and didn't wear. I wondered when I had started letting other people pick my colors. Back in the penthouse, he went straight to his study with the door open just enough to show me he wasn't hiding, just unavailable. I stood in the kitchen where the morning had been kind. The silver vitamin dish shone under the lights. I washed my lipstick off a glass that wasn't mine and put it away like nothing had happened. From the study, his voice floated out once, calm and practiced, as he returned a call. The elevator chimed faintly somewhere down the hall. I set the kettle on for tea even though I knew I wouldn't drink it. When he finally came to the doorway, jacket off, tie loosened where Brittany's fingers had been, his face was the same one he gives to cameras when he has to talk about losses as if they're opportunities. We'll address your little outburst, he said, in due time. I met his eyes and nodded, feeling a strange stillness settle over me. It wasn't peace. It was the space before an answer, wide and waiting. I turned off the kettle that had started to sing and let the apartment go quiet again, the city's lights blinking through the glass like a signal I hadn't noticed until now. He didn't move for a long time after those last words. The city lights flickered across his face, breaking him into fragments of gold and shadow, and I stood there holding my grandmother's coat, wondering when silence had become our most fluent language. The air between us felt too heavy to breathe. He finally exhaled and said in that careful, polished tone he uses when investors are watching, "We'll discuss your behavior." Then he turned his back on me and walked toward the bedroom, as if the rest of the night were a meeting he could adjourn at will. The door closed behind him. The click wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of finality that makes your skin prickle. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the reflection of the chandelier on the marble floor. The apartment suddenly seemed too large, too bright, too silent. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blared from the street below. The city kept moving, indifferent, while I felt like someone had pressed pause on my life. When I finally walked into the bedroom, Silas was still in his tuxedo, sitting at the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. The bow tie hung loose, the jacket draped over a chair like a skin he'd shed. He didn't look up when I entered. "You embarrassed me," he said, his voice measured, quiet. "In front of my board. In front of Morrison." I didn't answer. The pearls at my ears felt too heavy, so I unclasped them carefully and placed them on the nightstand. My hands shook, not from fear but from a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. He finally looked at me, then eyes flat, mouth tight. "You've been reckless, petty. Do you realize what you've done?" He stood and began pacing the way he does before a big negotiation. "I can't have this. I can't have you jeopardizing everything I've built. Until you can conduct yourself appropriately, you'll stay in the guest room." He might as well have been talking about a business partner who missed a deadline. The words were so sterile, so detached I almost laughed. But instead I just said, "Okay." He blinked, thrown off by my calm. "You'll stay there until you apologize. To me and to Brittany." That one almost broke my silence. To her. To the woman who knew the view from our bedroom? But my tongue stayed still. I swallowed the words, felt that metallic taste rise like biting foil. "Okay," I repeated softly. His eyes narrowed. He wanted a reaction. I gave him none. When I turned away to hang my robe, he muttered something under his breath, something about ungrateful. I let it fall between us like a stone. That night I gathered a pillow, a thin blanket, and my phone. The guest room door creaked when I pushed it open. The space smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish, untouched since my mother's last visit. I stood in the doorway for a moment, realizing this was the first time in 12 years I'd entered a room in my own home without asking, "Will he mind?" The bed was smaller, the mattress firmer. I sat down and let my shoulders drop. The silence wasn't lonely. It was strange, but not empty. I could hear the city through the cracked window, a siren somewhere far away, the rhythmic click of a crosswalk signal, the low hum of engines below. Silas's white noise machine wasn't here to drown it all out. I lay back, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The chandelier's glow leaked faintly through the hallway, forming a soft halo across the wall. For the first time in years I reached for the lamp and switched it on, just because I could. I picked up a novel from the side table, one I'd bought months ago and never dared to open after Silas said reading before bed made me too distracted. The pages whispered as I turned them. I read until my eyes burned. Around 3 a.m. I wandered into the guest bathroom, where I'd hidden an old kettle for visitors. I filled it with tap water and waited for it to hum. Steam curled upward, ghostly and light. I poured tea into a mug that said Barnard Alumni, one I'd kept tucked behind the fancy china because Silas hated mismatched things. The first sip was bitter, too strong, but it tasted like freedom. At some point I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was coming loose, makeup smudged, eyes red, but there was something new there too. Not beauty, not strength exactly. Just me, stripped of performance. I'd forgotten what that looked like. I crawled back into bed and pulled the blanket over my shoulders. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without waiting for someone else's breathing to dictate mine. The light through the guest room window was softer, warmer than the filtered glow in our bedroom. It fell across the antique writing desk beneath the window, my grandmother's desk. I hadn't used it since the move. Dust shimmered on its surface. After a shower, I sat down at it with a pen and a pad of stationery from some forgotten hotel. I began writing without thinking. At first it was a list, small things, my practice, my friends, my name, then larger things, my choices, my time, my peace. Each word felt like dragging out a thorn. My handwriting started neat, then loosened as the ink began to flow. I wrote about the charity events, the weekends spent smiling at people who only addressed me as Mrs. Blackwood, the dozen dinners where I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny because I could feel Silas watching my reactions. By the time I paused, 2 pages were filled. My chest hurt, but it was the ache of air returning after too long underwater. In the bottom drawer of the desk I found my old address book. The leather was cracked at the spine. I flipped through names I hadn't seen in years. Friends, clients, my yoga instructor who once told me I should write again. Between pages, a business card slipped out. Margaret Winters, attorney at law. Her handwriting on the back was small and neat, just in case you ever wake up. I remembered that charity auction, her steady handshake, the sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through my polite laughter. I hadn't known then what she meant. Now I did. I placed the card in front of me and stared at it, the way you stare at a locked door when you suddenly realize you know where the key is. At 6:30 a.m., a knock shattered the quiet. 3 precise raps. He always knocks like that, short, sharp, efficient. Juniper. His voice filtered through the door, smooth but tight. Are you awake? I didn't answer right away. I finished applying my lipstick in the mirror, capped the tube and set it on the dresser. My reflection looked strangely competent for a woman who'd just been demoted in her own home. The door creaked open halfway. Silas stood there, still in his sleep shirt, jaw freshly shaven, irritation already alive behind his eyes. Have you learned your lesson? I turned slowly, holding my travel mug in both hands. The smell of coffee filled the small room. Pie lesson? I asked evenly. You'll have to be specific. He stepped inside, crossing his arms. Don't start. You humiliated me. You're lucky I'm being patient. I glanced at my watch. Patience, I repeated softly. That's what we're calling it now. He frowned, clearly unused to this version of me. His eyes flicked over my outfit. A fitted suit, heels, hair brushed smooth. Why are you dressed like that? You're not going anywhere. I have appointments, I said. What appointments? Important ones. The simplicity of it seemed to unsettle him. He searched my face for some hint of weakness, but there was nothing left for him to find. I brushed past him, my shoulder grazing his arm, and headed for the kitchen. He followed me halfway down the hall. Juniper, don't be ridiculous. I slipped my travel mug into my bag. Good advice, I said, keeping my voice gentle. You should try it. He stopped then, caught between anger and confusion. You think you can just ignore me? I think, I said, opening the door to the elevator. You'll be surprised by how much I can do. The elevator doors closed before he could reply. As the floor numbers dropped, I leaned back against the wall, feeling my heartbeat slow. The reflection staring back at me in the polished steel looked calm, almost serene. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but for the first time in years, it would be somewhere of my own choosing. When the elevator timed at the lobby, I stepped out into the cool morning air. The doorman nodded politely, unaware that the woman passing him in a gray suit wasn't Mrs. Blackwood anymore. Not yet anyway, but soon. The morning air felt cooler than usual as I stepped onto Fifth Avenue, the traffic humming like a restless symphony. I hadn't planned where to go first, only that I couldn't go back. The city had a different texture now, sharp, electric, alive. Every step away from that penthouse felt like crossing an invisible border. I took the subway for the first time in years, slipping into a corner seat between a woman in scrubs and a man reading the financial section. Nobody looked twice at me, which was oddly comforting. I watched my reflection flicker against the dark tunnel glass, hair neat, lipstick steady, eyes alert. For the first time I looked like someone capable of starting over. I found myself standing in front of a glass tower on Lexington Avenue before I'd fully decided to come. 42 floors of polished ambition. Margaret Winters' office. The nameplate outside her suite gleamed gold, understated but commanding. I pressed the intercom and heard her assistant's crisp voice. Miss Hawthorne? Ms. Winters is expecting you. The office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, that particular scent of places where people negotiate live. Margaret stood behind a desk that seemed to stretch the width of a small stage. She was exactly as I remembered. Tailored navy suit, pearl studs, posture like a ruler. Her eyes, however, were warmer than I expected. You woke up, she said simply. I did, I replied, and handed her the folder of notes I'd spent half the night preparing. 17 pages of dates, conversations, receipts. 12 years distilled into evidence. She skimmed quickly, marking with a red pen, the sound of ink scratching like tiny verdicts. Every few minutes she murmured something under her breath. Classic diversion spending, patterned control behavior, possible misuse of marital assets. When I mentioned that Silas had once tried to hire her firm, her brow lifted. Oh, he did more than try, she said, opening a drawer. He wanted me to represent him during a merger, but I declined. Conflict of ethics, you could say. She reached into the cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Blackwood, S. She slid it across the desk with quiet satisfaction. I've been keeping this. Something told me you might need it. Inside were copies of financial disclosures from years past, public filings, corporate transfers, shell company data. Margaret leaned back. Men like your husband always think they invented secrecy, she said. But they forget secrecy leaves footprints, especially when it comes with a gold Amex card. Her voice carried no judgment, just precision. I found myself breathing easier, as if someone had switched on the lights in a room I didn't realize was dark. By the time we finished, she had a plan. We'll start with documentation. Financial, personal, property. Everything in your name and everything he's hidden. Do not alert him yet. And Juniper, her gaze softened. Don't confuse quiet with weakness. Silence can be strategy. When I left her office, the sky had shifted to a washed-out gray, the kind that made the glass buildings look like mirrors. I could see myself reflected in every surface, steady, upright, no longer small. The next day, I walked into Chase Bank's private client office, a place I'd visited only once before. Always at Silas's side. The receptionist greeted me with a cautious smile. Mrs. Blackwood? I hesitated, then said, Miss Hawthorne. They led me to an office overlooking Park Avenue, where a manager named Patricia introduced herself. She was in her 50s, silver streaks in her bun, eyes sharp but kind. You said you needed statements? 3 years, I said. Everything. She nodded and began typing. Within minutes, the printer hummed to life, spitting out page after page, each one a tiny piece of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. I flipped through the sheets and my stomach turned. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany's on my birthday, none of which I'd received. Hotel charges at the St. Regis, the Ritz, the Carlyle, always during his so-called conferences. And then, tucked among business expenses, a line that made me pause. Personal training services, Brittany Hale. I stared at the amount. Monthly, steady, hidden under wellness. I felt Patricia watching me. She didn't ask questions, but her silence was the kind that understands too much. There's more, she said gently. ATM withdrawals. Always Tuesday afternoons. Cash exact amounts. It's patterned. I hadn't noticed. I'd been too busy managing his calendar, his dinners, his public smile. The tears came without warning, quiet but unstoppable. Patricia wordlessly slid a box of tissues across the desk. You're not the first woman to come in here with this look, she said softly, but you might be one of the few who walks out stronger. I wiped my eyes and exhaled. I need new accounts, I said, my voice steadying. Ones he can't touch. He smiled approving. Let's make that happen. We set up everything under my maiden name. New passwords, new security phrases, new beginnings disguised as banking tasks. When I left, Patricia handed me a folder and said, keep this safe. And remember, money tells the truth people won't. 2 days later, I returned to the penthouse during Silas's work hours. The place smelled faintly of cedar polish and his cologne, remnants of a man who thought ownership meant permanence. The sommelier arrived precisely at noon, a tall man with silver hair and a calm authority that comes from decades among bottles older than both of us combined. Mr. Blackwood requested I appraise the collection last year, he said, setting up his clipboard. I raised an eyebrow. I wasn't aware. He chuckled. They rarely tell the wives, but I'm glad it's you I'm working with today. We moved through the temperature-controlled cellar together. He read off labels like sacred verses, Chateau Margaux, Petrus, Lafite, Rothschild. Then he paused at one empty slot. The 1982 Margaux. Beautiful case. Delivered to a Tribeca address last month. I froze. Tribeca, yes, for what Mr. Blackwood described as a client event. He glanced up, though I recall that address belongs to a residential building, not an office. He didn't elaborate further, but the unspoken words hung in the air like condensation. By the time he finished cataloging, the collection's worth was staggering. He photographed each label, documenting everything meticulously. Before leaving, he handed me a copy of the list. You'll want this, he said. In my experience, the wife usually gets the collection in the end. Men who cheat, he smiled ruefully, always underestimate the inventory. After he left, I walked through the penthouse slowly. Every object seemed to hum with new meaning. The art, the rugs, even the untouched piano. None of it felt like his anymore. That evening, as I waited in the lobby for a delivery truck, Thomas the doorman spotted me. Evening, Ms. He paused, uncertain, then smiled. Ms. Hawthorne. I blinked, surprised. You remembered. He shrugged. Always liked that name better. He hesitated, glancing toward the elevator before lowering his voice. I've been keeping something for you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black notebook. The cover was creased, corners bent from use. Started this about a year ago. Didn't feel right what I was seeing. Thought you might need it someday. Inside were neat handwritten notes, dates, times, little details. Returned with young blonde, not Mrs. B. Left 11 p.m. Said emergency meeting, back 6 a.m. Delivered flowers to lobby for Hale. My throat tightened. Thomas, why? He rubbed his neck awkwardly. Biz, you were always kind. You'd ask about my daughter when nobody else remembered her name. I figured if things ever went wrong up there, you'd need someone who saw it all. I closed the notebook gently. Thank you, I said. The words felt too small. He smiled faintly. Just glad to see you standing taller these days. As I stepped outside to meet the moving truck, the city wind swept across my face, cool, alive, and honest. For years I'd thought silence kept the peace, but silence had only kept me invisible. Now, every truth I uncovered felt like a brick in the foundation of something new. The driver called my name and I turned, notebook clutched to my chest. The headlights reflected in the glass doors behind me, and for the first time, I saw not Mrs. Blackwood, but Juniper Hawthorne standing on her own ground. The driver called my name and I turned, notebook pressed to my chest, still feeling the weight of Thomas's quiet faith. The truck idled at the curb, exhaust curling like breath in the cool air. I tucked the notebook into my bag, nodded to the men and kept walking. If I stopped long enough to think, I might lose my nerve. So I didn't. I let my feet decide and found myself 5 blocks south, in a narrow coffee shop that smelled like toasted almonds and fresh paint. A man in a navy work jacket lifted a hand. Juniper, he said, voice low as if we were meeting in a church. He had kind eyes and the square, careful hands of someone who does hard things gently. Rick. Discreet relocations. Sensitive extractions, I said, trying the phrase on my tongue. He smiled. That's one way to put it. We took a table in the corner, backs to the wall. I slid him the floor plan I'd drawn at my grandmother's desk with a ruler and patience I didn't know I still owned. Every room had markings in blue tape, dots for items to pack, X's for what could stay, stars for things that would break my heart if lost. He studied my notes as if they were a map to buried treasure. You did half my job already, he said. We'll use front and service entrances. Elevator timings here, good. Staff rotations. He tapped a space near the foyer. Thomas can tell you, I said. He's on nights this week. The morning doorman is chatty and hates early deliveries. Avoid him. Rick chuckled. You're a natural. He pulled out a small notebook and wrote in block letters. We go in light plain clothes. No logos. The van says Anderson's Flowers. You'll have a handler, Monica. She's the best. She'll text you updates in code. He wrote 2 phrases, then turned the notebook so I could read. Groceries delivered means we're in. Dinner ready means extraction complete. Groceries. Dinner. Simple enough. My heart picked up anyway like a bird against glass. We'll pack your things first, he said. Then the sentimental. Then anything he might try to claim later. Photos, documents, jewelry. His eyes flicked toward my bag. You carry essentials on you. No trail. 3 hours. I asked. He nodded. Once we start, don't come back midstream. You want to? Don't. It complicates things. Understood. He closed the notebook. Juniper, he added, leaning forward. We're not stealing. We're preserving. The word landed inside me like a steadying hand on the shoulder. We shook his grip firm. As we stood, he pressed a slim phone into my palm. Temporary number. Only for today and tomorrow. Monica's locked in. Outside, the sun had taken a step higher, turning the glass buildings into bright chalk. I walked back to the penthouse with a paper cup warming my fingers, aware of the 100 small moving parts now set into motion. Fear threaded through my excitement, not enough to stop me, just enough to remind me the stakes were real. Wednesday began with the click of a key in the lock. Honey, my mother called, stepping into the foyer with that brisk, floral scent she's worn forever. She found me in the guest room among piles of papers, the floor plan and a tangle of cords I was labeling. Her eyes traveled over the mess, then back to me. Well, she said, lips curving, there she is. The girl who used to organize her dollhouse by color and tax bracket. I laughed, a short, surprised sound. I don't know if I'm brave or foolish. Both, she said. That's how change starts. She kissed my cheek, then held me at arm's length. You look alive. We made tea in the small guest kettle, the familiar ritual soothing my hands. I told her about the bank, the wine collection, the notebook Thomas had kept. Her mouth thinned with a rage she didn't need to spell out. I started keeping things too, she said, reaching into her tote. She laid out a neat stack. Printed photos from galas, Silas in the background with Brittany's hand on his sleeve. Screenshots from social pages where the same young woman appeared in more frames than made sense. Restaurant receipts from family dinners he never attended. On top, a small, fabric-covered journal. Every time you called and said you were fine, but sounded like you'd been crying, I wrote down the date. I didn't want to push you. I wanted proof for when you decided you deserved better. Something in my chest gave way. Not a collapse. More like a door opening in a house with stuck hinges. I should have told you sooner, I whispered. You told me in the spaces between your words, she said softly. She opened her checkbook, wrote a number that made my breath hitch and slid it toward me. From your father's policy. I kept it for you. I always knew there would come a day I'd hand you this and say, go, start fresh. So, go. I stared at the check. It represented practical things. Deposits, lawyers, rooms with locks. but it also felt like permission. I tucked it into my bag and for a moment we just held hands the way we used to when crossing busy streets. "Will you be okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said and realized I believed it. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and looked back at me, a proud glint in her eyes. "When you see him trying to scare you into staying small, remember who raised you," she said. "He doesn't get to define your courage." After she was gone, the apartment felt different. Not emptier, lighter. At noon, I met my cousin Derek in a quiet hotel lounge that could have been any city's living room. Low chairs, soft lamps, a piano that nobody played. Derek works security for the Ritz-Carlton downtown. He slid into the seat across from me, ordered black coffee and waited until the server drifted out of earshot. Then he placed a flash drive on a cocktail napkin and tapped it once with his finger. "You didn't get this from me," he murmured. "Of course not," I said. "Weekend of the conference," he said. "Check-in video, elevator, lobby. Also, 3 other visits." He grimaced. "The concierge keeps copies of all receipts for a while." I pulled what I could without raising flag. I turned the drive between my fingers, small and ordinary looking. "And you're sure, Juniper," he said gently. "I wouldn't have called if I wasn't sure." He leaned in, voice lower. "She's wearing your bracelet in the clip from the elevator. Cartier. The one with the tiny emerald clasp." A cold current ran through me, not shock exactly. Confirmation has a different temperature. I nodded. "Thank you. Sorry you had to learn it this way," he said. "Sorry there was a way," I replied. He reached across and squeezed my hand, then sat back and tried to lighten the air. "Do you remember when we were 10 and you made me sign a contract before you'd trade lunches?" he said. "You kept stealing my pudding," I said. "You drafted a better agreement than half the managers I've had," he said, grinning. "You were always the one who wrote things down. You're still that person." After he left, I stayed a minute, holding the flash drive like a pebble that had skipped across water and finally landed in my palm. The evidence didn't feel like triumph, felt like a tool. Tools aren't exciting. They're necessary. Monica texted that evening. "Confirm floor plan received?" Question marks tagged in pink. I replied with photos of 3 items I'd forgotten to mark. My father's first edition books, a quilt my mother made for our wedding, a brass watering can Silas mocked but I used every summer. She responded with a thumbs up and a small flower emoji. Calmed me more than I expected. We set the timeline for Thursday morning. Silas would be at racquetball like clockwork. Rick liked clocks, so did I. There was one more thing I needed, a safe harbor. The penthouse wasn't mine yet, not in the way I needed. I pulled out the temporary phone and with a steady finger called the Carlisle. The woman at reservations spoke with that soft hotel smile you can hear. "Welcome back, Miss Hawthorne," she said as if I'd never left. "I need a suite," I said. "Quiet. A window. Good locks." "We have just the place," she replied. I went that afternoon, paid with my new card, and followed the bellman up in a mirrored elevator that reflected a woman I recognized more each hour. The door opened onto a room washed in pale light, the kind that forgives and invites in equal measure. The air smelled faintly of lavender, not cologne. I crossed to the window and looked down at Madison Avenue moving like a slow, elegant river. "Anything else we can do to make you comfortable?" the bellman asked, setting my small suitcase near the closet. "Actually," I said, "there is." I asked for a chair by the window, a comfortable one, not decorative. He frowned thoughtfully and said, "Give me 20 minutes. When he returned, 2 attendants carried in a high-backed chair upholstered in soft gray, the kind that makes you sit up and breathe deeper. It wasn't my grandmother's reading chair, but it was as close as a hotel could offer. I tipped more than was sensible. He looked surprised, then pleased. "We take security very seriously," he said quietly. "If you need privacy, you'll have it." I nodded, stung by sudden, grateful tears. After he left, I opened my suitcase. I hung my clothes, my choices, my colors, on hangers that didn't scrape. I lined up my shoes not by height but by comfort. I placed 2 books on the nightstand and a framed photo of my parents from the box I'd packed in the guest room. A beach picture, hair wild, eyes laughing. The room shifted with each small claim. As dusk crept in, I brewed the hotel's peppermint tea and sat in the gray chair, feet tucked under me, the city's hum filtering through the window. I set the flash drive on the table beside the new bank folder, the notebook from Thomas, my mother's stack of printouts, and the list from the sommelier. They looked like instruments in an orchestra waiting for a conductor's cue. Monica's text pinged. Route confirmed. Thomas on nights. Flower van staged. Groceries at 0700. I typed back one word. Ready. I ordered a simple dinner. chicken soup and a small salad, and ate it at the tiny desk, realizing I hadn't tasted food properly in days. A breeze slipped in through the barely open window, cool and clean. I pulled my hair down and brushed it out slowly, not because someone expected me to look a certain way but because it felt good. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and looked at the room the way a person looks at a friend who's offered a couch for the night. Grateful, a little shy, relieved. I turned off the lamps one by one and slid into sheets that didn't carry the memory of anyone else. The pillows smelled like soap and nothing else. No past, no performance. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I slept without dreams. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the light on the ceiling was gentle and sure. The city already buzzed below. Delivery trucks, a bicycle bell, heels clicking on the sidewalk. My phone glowed on the nightstand with a single message from Monica. Groceries delivered. I sat up, heart thudding, and placed my feet on the cool floor. The thrill and the fear rose together like two notes finding harmony. I took one breath, then another, and reached for my suit. Today, I thought, is the day I steal back my own life. Groceries delivered. The message glowed on my phone in the gray Carlisle light. I sat up, the room quiet except for the muted rumble of delivery trucks on Madison. Calm slid over me like a well-fitted coat. The fear was still there, useful, alert, but it no longer ran the show. I dressed in a simple slate suit, flats for speed, hair pulled back. The bellman nodded when I passed the desk as if we shared a secret. Outside, the morning had that polished look the city wears after a light sweep of rain. I hailed a cab for the 5-minute ride. Walking would have left me too much time to think. Thomas was on post when I stepped into our lobby. "Good morning, Miss Hawthorne," he said, voice low. His eyes flicked toward the curb. Parked there was a van lettered Anderson's Flowers in cheerful script. Two men in dark windbreakers unloaded tall buckets with nothing inside them. A third wheeled in a stack of flat boxes tied with twine. "He left 10 minutes ago," Thomas added. "Lucky Polo." He looked very pleased with himself. "Thank you," I said. The words had to carry everything: gratitude, resolve, the knowledge that after today I would owe fewer explanations and more dinners in thank. Monica appeared by the male alcove, all plain ponytail and clipboard, the kind of woman you'd overlook until the world depended on her. "Morning," she said like we were meeting for coffee. "Elevator A is timed. We'll stage first loads in the service corridor. You go up now, regular car, no stops." She tapped her watch. "We're on your schedule, not his." Upstairs, the guest room was exactly as I'd left it. Papers squared, pens lined up, the bed still neat from a night I didn't spend here. I walked to the master bedroom and stood at the window. At 6:45, right on cue, Silas's Tesla slid from the garage. Even from above I knew the set of his shoulders, the pep in his posture when he believed the day belonged to him. He paused at the curb to adjust his wristband, checked his reflection in the tinted glass, and drove off. I lifted my coffee mug in a small toast to the taillights and whispered, "Godspeed," as if blessing a ship that wouldn't be returning to this dock. Below, dog walkers traced their usual routes. A runner in a neon jacket waved to our porter. The ordinary world kept moving while mine changed shape. The first coded ping arrived, vases on table. I opened the front door. Two movers in dark jackets slipped past me without a word, rolling a dolly as if it held roses, not bubble wrap. Rick followed with a quiet nod, then peeled off toward the dining room. The apartment filled with that soft, industrious orchestra of careful people. Tape whispering, cardboard settling, footsteps that avoided squeaks. In the kitchen, a young mover named Luis held up a photo I hadn't marked, a picture of my parents on a Ferris wheel, faces turned to the sun. "Take?" he asked, neutral and gentle. "Take," I said. He smiled, slid it into a folder, and made a small check mark on his list. That single act felt like a benediction. Monica texted from the lobby. "Hydrangeas leaving. First run done." I moved through rooms with Rick at my shoulder. "China first," he said. "Breakables early while nerves are fresh." He lifted the lid of my grandmother's china cabinet as if it were a hymnal. The team wrapped each plate in bubble sleeves, labeling in neat block letters. "Hawthorne China, box 3 of 9. Watching gloved hands cradle those delicate pieces, I felt an odd mixture of heartbreak and pride, like seeing a child off to college. In the study, two movers donned cotton gloves to handle my father's first editions. "Spine up," one murmured to the other. They slid thin sheets between covers and stacked them in museum crates that locked with a soft click. I brushed my fingertip along the title of a worn copy of Middlemarch and said, mostly to myself, "My father read me the first page like a bedtime story." The mover nodded without looking up. "Mine read heist novels," he said. "Seems appropriate today." We shared a quick wry smile. Another ping. "Window box herbs collected." I pictured the little terracotta pots on the terrace. Basil, mint, the stubborn cherry tomato vine I coaxed through August. Silas used to call them your farm. The team had found the brass watering can too. Monica sent a photo with a question mark and I typed back, yes. A moment later, pack. We were 3 hours into the ballet when I opened the closet and saw the safe. It crouched on the floor behind suits lined like soldiers. My mouth went dry for a second, not from fear, but from the weight of what comes when you choose to look. I knelt, entered the combination, our wedding date of course, and the bolt slid back with a small, obedient sigh. Passports, birth certificates, insurance policies, the will. I laid each on the carpet and photographed them with my phone. Then I found the thing I'd almost forgotten existed, the prenup. Thick, officious, smug on cream paper. Margaret had already told me it would crumble under daylight, but I took photos anyway, every page, every signature. Behind it, bundled in a ribbon so dry it cracked, were my letters. The ones I wrote him when marriage still felt like a new country. He hadn't opened them. Dust marked the edges like a quiet verdict. And there, in a velvet box pushed to the back, I found my grandmother's emerald ring. Silas once shrugged and said, it must have been misplaced in the move. Misplaced had been his tidy word for so many things that didn't suit him. I lifted the ring out, the stone catching the morning light, and slipped it onto my finger. It settled as if it had been waiting. Monica pinged. Lily's refreshed. Second wave. I placed the prenup back in the safe, let him look at it and remember how certain he'd been, and took the passports, birth certificates, the ring and my father's pocket watch, tucking them into my crossbody. I closed the safe, twisted the dial to an unfamiliar number and felt my spine lengthen. A small snag. The housekeeper, Alma, arrived with a basket on her arm. She paused in the entry, eyes widening at the flower boxes and tape. Senora, she whispered. It's okay, I said softly, stepping close. Today is a special kind of cleaning. She looked at me for a long second, reading more than I was saying. Then she squared her shoulders. I make sure no one bothers, she said, and took up a post by the door like a guardian. I pressed cash into her hand and she shook her head, then tucked it away without looking. You were always kind, she murmured. The sentence warmed me for the next hour. At noon Rick checked his watch. Halfway, he said. We're ahead. He pointed to a small gallery wall in the hall. They were photographs from places I'd loved before I learned to pretend. Coney Island in winter, a bookstore in Rome, a rainy corner in Dublin where a busker played violin. Take, I said. A mover with gentle hands eased each frame from its hook, wrapped it in foam, numbered the back. I caught my reflection in the glass as it went into the sleeve. Hair neat, eyes clear. I didn't look like a runaway. I looked like a woman who had read the plan twice and remembered the exits. Another ping. Peonies arranged. Third wave leaving. Monica added. Doorman offers umbrella, rain starting. I pictured Thomas handing out plastic sleeves to imaginary blossoms and smiled. At 2, I stood in the bathroom and looked at the tray of perfume bottles I never wore for myself, gifts chosen for their names. Authority, Victory, Muse. I chose one I'd bought years ago and tucked away because someone said sandalwood didn't suit me. I dabbed it at my wrist. The scent bloomed warm and clean, quiet confidence instead of announcement. The room felt more honest at once. By 3, the apartment had edges I'd never seen. Without my things, the spaces where I'd been obedient were obvious. The kitchen, once staged for entertaining, looked like a showroom. The study felt like a set for a man performing competence. The only room that still hummed with something true was the guest room, where my grandmother's desk sat under the window, a sliver of light on its scarred surface. Dinner ready at 15:30, Monica sent. Almost complete. Last loads, Rick confirmed. We leave the furniture he'll trip over with his own ego. The rest is yours. He glanced toward the study. Your documents? Next, I said. I carried a slim box to the desk and opened it. Inside were the divorce papers, the ink still dark where the clerk had stamped them. I added the forensic accounting report, tabbed, highlighted, merciless, open to the neat page that traced company funds into Brittany's paycheck as if it were a recipe for cake. Finally, a small piece of cardstock I'd had printed at a tiny shop on Lexington. 6 words set in black type, nothing more. I stepped into his study at exactly 4. The room had that stillness expensive wood gets in late afternoon, the light falling in clean bars across the leather blotter. I could see the outline where his laptop usually sat, the faint smear from his wrist where he polished the desk with his constant moving. I straightened a pen because that's what I do and then arranged the documents. Divorce papers on the left, fanned so the case number and the stamped seal were easy to see. Forensic report on the right, tab peeking like a discreet flag. My little card centered on top. I took out my phone and photographed the desk. Once, then again, then a third time from the doorway. Not for spite, for record, for memory, for the moment my life changed because I decided it would. I stood a while longer listening to the apartment. The movers had gone. The flower van had become a rumor 2 blocks away. The only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerator and a distant siren curling down Fifth. I went room to room, sliding open a drawer here, closing a cabinet there, saying quiet goodbyes not to the things but to the version of myself who kept them dusted. On my way out I paused by the hall mirror. A woman in a slate suit looked back, a ring with a dark green stone catching the last light. I adjusted the collar of my jacket and lifted my chin. Not defiant, not afraid, just decided. At the door I tucked Thomas's notebook deeper into my bag and turned off the lights. The elevator arrived with a soft ding. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the study's doorway, the papers waiting on the desk like a clock chiming the hour. Downstairs, Thomas handed me an umbrella. Little shower, he said. Should pass. Everything all right? He added, a question wrapped in 3 ordinary words. Everything is in its place, I said. He nodded once, satisfied. I stepped out into the light rain. The city smelled like wet stone and possibility. I didn't look back. Rain slicked the streets, pooling light from passing taxis into ribbons of gold and red. My umbrella clicked shut as I entered the building. The doorman gave me a small nod, solemn, knowing, and pressed the elevator button before I could. The ride up felt longer than usual, the quiet hum of the machinery almost like a held breath. When the doors opened, the penthouse greeted me with stillness. The air smelled faintly of cedar and the faint ozone left by recent vacuuming. My shoes made soft sounds on the marble. I set the umbrella against the wall, the handle dripping a slow rhythm. Upstairs, the silence broke. A door slammed. Then another. The rhythm of footsteps, fast, angry, disbelieving, pounded through the ceiling. I stood in the hallway below, my tea still steaming on the table where I'd left it, and listened to the moment my husband's world stopped making sense. He moved in frantic circles above me. Closet doors opening, drawers sliding, hangers clattering. Every sound sharper than the last. And then, the stillness that followed. The kind of silence that announces understanding. I sipped my tea, let the warmth sit on my tongue. I didn't need to see him to picture the scene. Empty closet, missing belongings, the gaping absence where control used to live. The first word reached me like a distant echo. Juniper. Drawn out, clipped with disbelief. It wasn't a call. It was an accusation. He found me minutes later. The door to the guest room burst open with the drama of a courtroom. Silas filled the frame, his tie askew, his face the color of bad news. The precision he wore like armor at board meetings was gone. His hair was mussed, his eyes bloodshot, the careful polish cracked through. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. His voice was lower than I expected, ragged around the edges. "Where are your things? What have you done?" I set my cup down carefully on its saucer. "I've relocated," I said. He blinked, disoriented by my calm. "Relocated? Don't play games, Juniper. Where's everything? Where's our property?" "Mostly in storage," I said, folding the edge of a paper on the desk beside me. "Somewhere climate-controlled, you'll be glad to know." He stared, chest rising and falling, his hands flexing uselessly at his sides. "You can't just take." "I can," I said evenly. And I did. Every item was legally acquired during our marriage. Every removal properly documented. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to that dangerous, controlled tone, the one he used when a deal started slipping through his fingers. "You think you can humiliate me like this? Do you have any idea what this looks like? To my colleagues? To Morrison?" "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "Like accountability." For a moment he looked almost frightened, then angry again. "You've lost your mind. You've gone completely irrational." I stood and smoothed my jacket. "Irrational," I echoed. "Silas, I've executed a strategic restructuring of personal assets. You should appreciate the phrasing. You taught it to me." He blinked as though the words didn't belong in my mouth. "This isn't a negotiation, Juniper. This is a disaster. Not for me." He paced to the window, then back. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it. I'll have every lawyer in the city on retainer by morning." I tilted my head. "You might want to save the retainer money for your criminal defense fund." He froze mid-step. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up on the desk, Margaret's name flashing across the screen. Perfect timing. I picked it up and tapped speaker. "Juniper." Margaret's voice came through, smooth and sharp. "I assume you're with him?" Silas moved closer, posture shifting into his CEO stance, that false confidence he wears like cologne. "Margaret," he said, cutting in, Whatever nonsense my wife has told you. I'm not your employee, Silas, she interrupted. And she's not your wife much longer. I'm calling to inform you that we've submitted evidence of embezzlement to the board. His mouth fell open slightly. That's absurd. Charges will be reviewed Monday, she continued, unbothered. We have documentation tracing acquisition funds into a personal account in Brittany Hale's name. I believe you used the label, consulting fees. Care to clarify? Color drained from his face so fast it was almost theatrical. Those were business expenses, he stammered. She was under contract. Then you'll have no problem producing deliverables, correct? Margaret's tone was almost kind. The board looks forward to seeing them. He grabbed the phone from my hand. Margaret, listen. She cut him off with the precision of a surgeon. I've been listening to you for years, Silas. Now it's your turn. Her voice softened but only slightly. You should know, there are witnesses too. The CFO, for instance. And we've already arranged for forensic review of your company card. There's no negotiating out of this. He stood perfectly still, breathing hard. When she hung up, the silence came back, thick as smoke. He handed me the phone with a trembling hand. You think this makes you the hero? He said. You've destroyed everything. My reputation, my company. No, I said quietly. You did that. I just made sure someone finally noticed. He turned away, one hand pressed to his temple, the other clutching the edge of the desk like the room might tilt. You don't understand what you've done. You can't walk away from this. You owe me. I laughed once, low and sharp. Oh, you. He faced me again, eyes wild. Yes. Every success I built you benefited from. You lived in this penthouse, wore the clothes, went to the dinners. You think you can rewrite history now? I'm not rewriting anything, I said. I'm finishing the last chapter. He took a step toward me. Juniper, don't do this. Do what exactly? He hesitated, looking suddenly small like a man trying to negotiate with gravity. I picked up my grandmother's cashmere coat from the chair, draped it over my arm and looked him squarely in the eye. You told me once that marriage is about managing assets. You were right. I just didn't realize I was one of them. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't give him the chance to find words. I learned from you, I said. Efficiency, timing, tone. You're very good at winning, Silas. You just never noticed when the game changed. He sank into the chair behind him, elbows on his knees, hands pressed to his forehead. You can't mean to go through with this. You can't humiliate me like this. It's not humiliation, I said. It's consequence. He looked up, eyes wet now, anger dissolving into something closer to desperation. Please, Juniper. Be reasonable. I paused at the doorway, the city lights glittering faintly behind him. Reasonable was staying quiet while you erased me, I said. Reasonable was pretending not to see what everyone else already knew. But unreasonable, I smiled faintly. Unreasonable finally got me here. He rose halfway from his chair, hand reaching out. You're making a mistake, he said hoarsely. You'll come crawling back. I looked at the hand that had once worn my ring and shook my head. You still think everything that leaves you will eventually return. That's your real mistake. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of rain against the glass and the slow tick of the clock above the mantel. I could almost feel the years peeling away. Every dinner, every compromise, every apology I'd given to keep the peace. Then I stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to speak quietly. Your mother called me last week, I said. She told me she always knew you'd ruin the best thing that ever happened to you. She just didn't know how soon. He went still. And for what it's worth, I added, your golf buddies have a betting pool on when Brittany figures out she's dating a man who mistakes control for love. I didn't place a bet. It didn't seem fair. His face twisted. You can't talk to me like this. I already am, I said, and I'll only have to do it once. I adjusted my coat, slipped the strap of my bag over my shoulder and opened the door. Behind me, I heard him say my name again, softer this time, like maybe it could anchor me. It didn't. I stepped into the hallway, closed the door gently and let the latch click. The sound was clean, final. A full stop at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for 12 years. The elevator doors closed behind me, sealing away the echo of his voice. By the time I stepped into the Carlisle lobby, my pulse had slowed to something steady, deliberate. The marble floor gleamed like calm water under soft lights. I crossed it slowly, each step lighter than the last. Upstairs, my suite smelled faintly of lavender and peppermint tea. I set my coat on the chair, sat by the window and watched the rain thin into mist. When my phone rang Monday morning, the name flashing across the screen made me smile. Margaret, I answered. You'll want to hear this, she said. Her voice was bright, almost girlish with the kind of excitement lawyers rarely allow themselves. I'm standing outside the boardroom. I could hear muffled voices in the background, the scrape of chairs, the controlled chaos of a crisis. How bad is it? I asked. Oh, it's exquisite, she said. They called an emergency meeting. Silas thought he could talk his way through it. You should have seen him, suit immaculate, hair combed to repentance, and Brittany perched beside him like a decorative vase. I pictured it instantly. The long glass table, the tension thick as dry ice, the faces of the men who once toasted him now sharpening into judgment. Richard Morrison himself asked her to present her quarterly strategies, Margaret continued. She opened a PowerPoint full of stock photos and something about brand synergy. Morrison asked, specifically, what measurable outcomes have you delivered? She froze. Someone coughed. It was cinematic. I laughed quietly. Please tell me someone recorded it. I wish, she said. But there's more. He asked why her previous role on LinkedIn says, brand ambassador for Azul Vida Tequila. Apparently she tried to pivot, started talking about emotional branding through lifestyle storytelling. Morrison asked if that meant free shots at corporate retreats. Oh God, I murmured. She tried to look at Silas for help. He looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. By the time it ended, the board voted to place him on administrative leave pending an investigation. A pause, then a faint rustle of paper. One of the assistants just texted me, Margaret said. You'll love this. A buzz followed on my own phone. A message from an unfamiliar number. The king has fallen, bottle with popping cork. I couldn't help it. I laughed until tears stung my eyes. Tell her she has excellent timing, I said. Juniper, Margaret said, her voice softening. You did it. No, I said, exhaling. He did. Tuesday arrived quiet, gray. I was halfway through my tea when someone knocked on my suite door. The knock was urgent, uneven. I opened it to find Brittany standing there, mascara streaked, hair limp, designer bag clutched to her chest like a life raft. Please, she said before I could speak. He's being horrible. I didn't know where else to go. I let her in. She hovered by the window, eyes darting everywhere. He cut off my accounts, she said. Said I violated some agreement. He made me sign an NDA months ago, and now he's threatening to sue me if I talk. Her voice cracked. He said it's my fault this happened. I gestured toward the chair. Sit down, Brittany. She did, fumbling for a tissue from her bag. The trembling in her hands made her bracelets jingle. He promised me, she whispered. He said he was leaving you in January. He even showed me houses in Connecticut. He said we'd be partners. I studied her face. The panic, the disbelief that someone could be both charming and cruel. It was a look I knew well. He's been paying my rent, she continued. But now he wants it back. Said I benefited unfairly. Who says that? Silas, I said. Her eyes lifted, wet and wide. He said I'd ruined him. That you, she faltered. You're vindictive. That you turned everyone against him. He's turning on you now because you're no longer useful, I said gently. She swallowed hard. Do you hate me? I considered the question. I did, I said finally. For a while. But hate gives him too much credit. You were just another part of his collection. A tear slid down her cheek. I thought I was special. So did I said. For a long moment the only sound was the rain against the window. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Margaret Winters. Call her. Tell her everything. She looked down at it, confusion flickering into realization. You're giving me your lawyer? She's good at cleaning up after men like Silas, I said. Her shoulders sagged, some of the panic leaving her face. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't kindness, I said softly. It's closure. When she left, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said, he's terrified of you now. Good, I said. He should be. The next visitor came the following morning, announced by the crisp knock of someone who doesn't wait to be invited. I opened the door to find Eleanor Blackwood standing in a perfect camel coat, pearls at her throat, eyes cool and assessing. Mrs. Blackwood, I said. Eleanor, she corrected, stepping inside. We're well past the formalities, don't you think? She glanced around the suite, her gaze pausing on the books stacked by the window. Nice space. Peaceful. That's rare in this city. I gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, reaching into her structured handbag. I didn't come to apologize for him, she said, pulling out a thick manila folder, though heaven knows someone should. He handed it to me. Inside were photocopies, old court records, settlement documents, names I didn't recognize. What is this? I asked. His past, she said simply, the parts he didn't bother to erase. I scanned the pages. Divorce papers. The first marriage he claimed was annulled. Notes from an HR department about a harassment claim settled quietly. A second, less formal payment labeled consultant exit fee. I kept them, Eleanor said, sitting finally. Her voice had softened, but her posture stayed upright, spine like iron. I told myself it was for protection, but I think I just couldn't bear to throw away the evidence of who my son really was. I looked up at her. Why are you giving them to me? Because you're the only one who ever stood up to him, she said. And because you're about to be the one who finally holds him accountable. Something shifted in her expression then. Regret, yes, but also relief. His father was charming, she continued. He could talk his way through anything. But Silas, he inherited the ambition without the grace. I raised him to think success made him safe. It didn't. She stood, smoothed her coat. I don't expect forgiveness, Juniper. But I am sorry for you for the damage he's done. Before I could speak, she stepped forward and surprised me with a hug. Brief, firm, almost motherly. I always hoped you'd be the one to stop him, she whispered near my ear. When she left, the folder sat on my lap like a small, heavy truth. Friday's mediation was held at the penthouse. It felt strange walking back through those doors, familiar space stripped of intimacy. The art gleamed without warmth, the furniture posed for a life that no longer fit anyone. Silas was already there, sitting beside his attorney. His suit looked too large, his tie loose, the shine gone from his shoes. I took my place across the table, my lawyer on one side, the mediator at the head. The process began with formalities. Asset lists, valuations, percentages. Silas tried to argue for sentimental items, paintings he'd never noticed, sculptures he'd dismissed as dust collectors. That painting, he said, gesturing toward the Monet print, was part of our shared aesthetic. I almost smiled. You mean the one you said clashed with the color of your desk? His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We moved on to furniture. He tried to claim my grandmother's dining set, citing historical value. I produced an email he'd written 2 years ago calling it old garbage we should donate. Silas leaned back, jaw tightening. You've turned everything into evidence. No, I said quietly. You did that when you made everything transactional. The mediator cleared his throat. Let's stay civil. We did barely. Every object carried a memory. Every claim was another small severing. At one point his attorney asked about a photo album, our honeymoon in Italy. I looked at it, worn edges, smiling faces from a lifetime ago. You can keep it, I said. Those people don't exist anymore. For the first time all morning Silas looked at me, not the papers. There was something raw in his expression. Remorse maybe, or just the recognition that the performance was over. When the final signatures were placed, the mediator gathered the folders. That concludes the division, he said. I stood, smoothing my jacket. The penthouse felt smaller now, the air thinner. As I turned toward the door, I caught a glimpse of the study down the hall. Empty desk, faint outline where my papers had rested. Silas's voice followed, soft, uncertain. Juniper. I paused but didn't look back. Take care of yourself, Silas, I said. You're going to need it. And then I left him there, surrounded by the fragments of the empire he'd built and broken with his own hand. The hallway swallowed the soft click of the study door, and I walked toward the elevator without looking back. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and rain carried in on people's coats. When the doors slid open, my reflection in the brushed steel looked steady, almost serene. I pressed lobby, folded my hands, and let the elevator carry me out of the life I'd kept alive far too long. 3 months later I stood in a different hallway, the courthouse, wearing the emerald dress Silas always disliked. The fabric skimmed my knees, bright against the beige tile and the scuffed baseboards that had seen more endings than a library. Margaret stood beside me, reading glasses low on her nose, a stack of papers tucked under her arm like a shield she knew how to use. When the clerk called my case, we walked into the courtroom together. The judge was a woman with silver hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and eyes that had weighed 1,000 stories just like mine. She looked at the documents, then at me. Miss Hawthorne, she said, the name rolling out as if it had never been anything else. Are you ready to finalize? I am, I said, clear and sure. We went through the formalities. The decree restored my name, my property, my quiet. When the judge stamped the final page, the sound echoed like a soft gavel against my bones. She glanced up and gave me the smallest smile, the kind professionals share with people who have survived the hard part. Congratulations, she said. May this be a beginning. Outside the courtroom, Margaret hugged me in the corridor. We didn't just win, she said in my ear. We closed the book. She handed me a copy of the decree, then another file with neat tabs. For your records, she added. The settlement, the accounting, and, my favorite, the findings regarding misuse of company fund. That particular chapter will trail him like a long tail on a comet. We walked down the courthouse steps into winter sun. The city felt different at that hour, less hurried, as if taking a breath between meetings. I raised my face to the light. My name was mine again. It fit like a coat I'd grown into. The penthouse key was heavy in my palm that afternoon when I let myself in. Empty rooms hold their breath differently after a storm. I walked through each space quietly. The study no longer felt like a set. The guest room, my room, was filled with boxes labeled in my hand, not his. I opened one labeled desk top drawer, and took out my grandmother's fountain pen. It wrote in smooth blue lines on crisp paper, and my first word under my restored name looked steady: Juniper. A week later, I signed a lease on a small office on the Upper West Side. Second floor, sunlight that flattered no one and hid nothing, paint still drying in the corners. I peeled protective film off the door plaque and pressed on the letters myself. Juniper Hawthorne LSW, consultation. I'd put my license in a frame years ago and tucked it away because a wife didn't need such things, or so I'd been told. Now it hung at eye level. The room smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I chose chairs that invited conversation instead of performance, a round rug that warmed the floor, a bookshelf that held more than decor. The receptionist desk stayed small by choice. No gatekeepers here. Just a woman with kind eyes named Tessa who baked lemon bars for nervous clients and remembered how everyone took their tea. On the first morning, I brought in a vase of grocery store tulips and set them by the window. They opened as the sun moved along the wall, like a promise blooming on schedule. My first client was a woman in a navy coat who kept her hands folded until they ached. She had seen my name in the society pages. Silas's fall made for a story people read with coffee and a shake of the head, and she wanted help leaving a man whose voice lived in her own bones. She sat on the gray chair, stared at the rug's pattern and asked, "How did you know you were ready?" "I didn't," I told her. "I just knew I wasn't willing to stay." We talked until the tightness in her jaw softened. When she left, she pressed my hands in gratitude and whispered, "I'll be back next week." She was, and so were others, 12 by the end of the month. Women who knew private schools and private pain. Women who needed a plan more than sympathy. I built binders with tabs and phone trees and resource lists. We practiced hard conversations in my office until they sounded like truths instead of apologies. Not every story was neat. One client went back twice. Another changed the locks, then called me at midnight to say the silence felt loud. I kept tissues on the side table and a bowl of peppermint candies by the door because sometimes small sweetness makes bravery easier to swallow. Between sessions, I opened the window to let in the hum of Broadway. The bus brakes, a bike bell, someone singing off-key down the block. The city had always been a chorus. I could hear it again. Around month 6, a pale green envelope arrived at my office with no return address. Inside was a card with a watercolor tree on the front. The handwriting surprised me. Rounded letters, hopeful and young. "Juniper," it began. "I wanted you to know I'm okay. I'm in Vermont running a small yoga studio. Turns out I'm better at breathing than branding. Thank you for the wake-up call even if you didn't mean it for me." There was a photo tucked into the fold. Brittany in leggings and a sweater, hair in a messy bun, cheeks flushed, standing under a wooden sign that said Mountain Breath Yoga. Next to her, a bearded man in flannel held a mug, his smile quiet. On the back of the photo she'd written, "His name is Jake. He reads poetry. He has never owned a suit." I think that's the point. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. I set the card on the bookshelf beside a small carved bird my mother found at a flea market. Later, when a client told me she felt ashamed for not seeing a pattern sooner, I thought of Brittany's face and said, "We see things when we're ready, not before." Spring arrived in fits and starts, sunny Tuesdays and stubborn Thursdays. The day of my book launch I woke before the alarm, excitement ticking in my body like a friendly metronome. We titled it The Guest Room Revolution, a phrase that made Margaret grin the first time she heard it. The publisher booked the same hotel ballroom where Silas had introduced me to Brittany, and I said yes without hesitation. Irony, when used correctly, can be a healing spice. The lobby smelled like lilies and coffee. Inside the event room, the chairs formed neat rows. A small stage at the front lined with copies of my book stacked like brick. Tessa fussed over the name tags and glow of the floor lamps, then pressed a peppermint into my hand like a coach handing over tape. "For nerves," she said. People began to arrive. Women with bright eyes and careful smiles. A few men in the back who looked like they were taking notes for sisters and friends. My mother entered on the arm of Thomas, who wore a suit that fit like it had been waiting in his closet for a reason. He waved the smallest wave and mouthed, proud. I squeezed his fingers when he reached me and said, "You clean up well." Even Eleanor appeared, standing near the back in a navy dress, her expression unreadable until I caught the small nod that said more than flowers would have. Margaret took a seat in the front and crossed her legs with the crisp satisfaction of someone who knows a plan delivered. The room filled with a session's worth of stories. Quiet divorces, loud ones, stalled ones that hadn't happened yet but had already begun in the heart. When it was time, I stepped onto the stage. The mic felt warm in my hand. I read a passage about the first night in the guest room, about the odd freedom of a lamp left on and a window cracked open to real air. The audience was still, the kind of stillness that means people are holding their breath. When I finished, I set the book down and opened to questions. A woman with gray hair in a pink cardigan stood. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. The room waited. I thought of the years, the dinners, the practice smiles. I thought of the night I said okay to the guest room and meant watch me. I shook my head. I regret not moving to the guest room sooner, I said. That's where I learned the lesson I should have learned earlier, that comfort can be a cage if you let someone else lock the door. Applause rose like heat. I felt it on my face, my hands inside my chest. For a moment I let it rest there. Then I read the dedication. To all the women who were told to learn their lesson and did. The clapping this time came with a few cheers. It was not a victory lap, it was a welcome home. Afterward I signed books and listened. A nurse told me she'd put a deposit down on her own apartment that morning. A teacher said she'd saved my article about documentation as a checklist. A woman about my age squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for showing me that the person in the mirror can change." When the room thinned, Thomas approached shyly with a copy for me to sign. To the best doorman in New York, I wrote, then added, and the quiet hero of the lobby. He laughed, then cleared his throat and said, "Miss Hawthorne, there's a line past the bar." As I packed up, the hotel lights glowed a little warmer. I walked to the window where months ago I'd watched a younger version of myself navigate a different kind of evening. Outside, the city moved in the way it always does. Hurrying, pausing, colliding, forgiving. My phone buzzed with a text from Tessa. "Tomorrow, 3 new clients. Also, your mother wants pancakes." I smiled. Pancakes sounded like a plan. That night, back at the penthouse, I climbed the stairs and paused at the threshold of the guest room. The desk sat under the window exactly as before, scratches and all. I ran my fingers along its edge and felt the groove where my pen had dug in weeks ago. Through the glass, the park glowed a soft, improbable green. I opened the window a few inches and breathed in the mild night air, the scent of damp leaves, a hint of pretzel cart, a stray note from a saxophone somewhere down the avenue. On the dresser, my grandmother's emerald ring caught a line of streetlight and threw it back in a small, satisfied wink. I turned off the lamp, slid beneath the sheet and listened. Not for someone else's footsteps or someone else's breath. For the city, for my own quiet heart keeping time. I slept without bracing. In the morning, sunlight poured across the floor in that clean way it does when a day hasn't yet been complicated by anyone's expectations. I walked to the kitchen, made coffee the way I like it, and set 2 plates on the counter for pancakes because my mother would arrive with a newspaper and opinions. I caught my reflection in the microwave door, hair messy, eyes bright, mouth ready to smile, and felt that gentle certainty again. The person who controls the boardroom isn't always the one who controls the board. Sometimes it's the one who owns the building. And sometimes the best takeover is the one where you take back your own life, one room at a time until the whole place belongs to you. If this story of power, freedom, and payback gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Juniper calmly placed those divorce papers on Silas's desk. Pure poetic justice. What was your favorite moment? Share it in the comments below. And don't miss more stories of courage, reinvention, and sweet revenge. Subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss the next one.